The forest that isn't on the map. This story begins in Oregon, when a young couple, Lily and Evan, decided to go camping for the weekend. Their plan was simple: disconnect from the internet, immerse themselves in nature, and just enjoy the silence away from the city. They chose a place that, according to the locals, was unknown to tourists: the forest beyond the horizon. However, no map or navigation app showed the exact location of this forest. Only the old-timers of the village where the couple stayed knew it. One of the locals, an elderly man with a gray beard, warned them, "You are young and curious, but this forest is not for tourists. Many have gone there, but not all have returned." Lily laughed, taking it for a local tale to add mystery to their trip. Evan, on the contrary, took the warning seriously, but did not want to look like a coward in front of his girlfriend. The next morning, the couple headed to the forest. The road there was broken and barely noticeable. A fog rose around them, through which they could barely discern the beginning of the forest thicket. The first thing they noticed as they approached was the absolute silence. There were no birds or insects to be heard, only their footsteps on the damp ground. "Isn't it strange that it's so quiet here?" Lily asked in a whisper, as if she was afraid to disturb the peace of the forest. Evan shrugged. "Maybe there are no animals here, or maybe it's just morning." They pitched their tent in a small clearing surrounded by old, moss-covered trees. While Lily was busy making a fire, Evan decided to take a walk around the area. He left for a while, but returned with a wary look. "Did you see that?" he asked. Lily looked up. "What exactly?" "That tree over there." He pointed to a tall oak tree at the edge of the clearing. "I swear it just moved. I just blinked, and it was somewhere else." Lily snorted, thinking Evan was joking, but something in his voice made her look at the tree. It seemed as still as the others, but the feeling that someone was watching them began to fill the air. As night fell, the forest changed. The darkness became so thick that even the light of the fire barely penetrated it. Lily noticed that the trees seemed closer to the clearing than during the day. "It's just a trick of the light," she reassured herself. But then the sounds began. It was a faint whisper that came from everywhere and nowhere at once. It seemed like someone was saying their names. Lily perked up. "Did you hear that?" Evan nodded, but said nothing. He squeezed her hand and stared tensely into the darkness. Suddenly, laughter came from the forest. Childish, ringing, and so out of place in this setting. Lily jumped to her feet. "Who's there?" she cried, trying to hide her fear. There was no answer, only silence, broken by their own breathing. The next morning they decided to leave. The forest was too strange, and their nerves were on edge. But when they started to pack, they noticed that the path they had come on had disappeared. There were only trees, fog, and this clearing, which now seemed too small. Panic seized them, but they tried to remain rational. "We need to go straight ahead," Evan suggested. "The forest can't be endless." And so they went. But the further they went, the more the forest seemed to change its shape. Familiar landmarks disappeared, and new ones appeared out of nowhere. Time seemed to have lost its meaning. On the third day, exhausted and weak, they came across an old hut hidden behind thick branches. It looked abandoned, but the door was slightly open, as if inviting them inside. When they entered, they found a table with a map on it. It was a map of the forest, but it listed things they hadn't seen: the Tree of Shadows, the River of Forgetfulness, and the Lake of Reflections. they realized that the forest was more than just a geographical place. It was a labyrinth where their minds were being played with. Suddenly, the door of the hut slammed shut, and behind them, they heard that same childish laughter. Turning around, they saw a girl. Her eyes were empty, and her skin was almost transparent. She smiled and said softly, "You shouldn't have come here. The forest won't let you go now." Then their memories became blurry. They couldn't remember how they got out of the forest. The only thing they knew for sure was that it wasn't morning anymore. But a month later, they were found on the side of the road, exhausted and without any hope. But even after they returned home, they noticed how the trees outside their window seemed to be getting closer. Their nightmares did not stop. The forest continued to call them. And one morning, when their neighbors came to check why Lily and Evan were not answering their phones, they found the door to their house open. There was no sign of the couple inside, only a strange smell of damp moss and dirt. On the floor lay the same map. It now had 2 new marks: Lily's house and Evan's house. The forest had taken them forever. After Lily and Evan disappeared, their case attracted the attention of the local police. But despite a thorough search, neither the couple nor any trace of their presence was found in the forest or in the surrounding area. The only thing that remained strange was the map lying in their house. It was confiscated for investigation, but soon one of the detectives working on the case began to notice oddities. The map had changed. Detective James Weller was haunted by this discovery. New details began to appear on the map. First, small lines that he had not noticed before, then entire areas that seemed to change on their own. One night, while staying in the office, he heard a whisper coming from the drawer of the desk where the map was lying. The whisper was calling his name. James decided to continue the investigation alone. He felt that this case could not be entrusted to others. Too many inexplicable things. He went to the very village where Lily and Evan were last seen. There, to his surprise, he found that the locals seemed to avoid talking about this forest. No one wanted to talk about it, except for one old man James met in a bar. "This forest is not for people," the old man said, his voice shaking. "It chooses those it wants. If it has shown itself to you, then you too are now its victim." The old man's words sounded absurd, but inside James there was a growing feeling that he had already entered the forest's game. The next day, he took the map and headed to where, according to his calculations, the cabin mentioned in the stories should be located. The forest greeted him the same way it had greeted Lily and Evan: oppressive silence and thick fog. James noticed that even the birds did not fly in this part of the forest. As he walked, he began to feel something change around him, as if the forest itself was breathing and moving. The map in his hands began to heat up. He stopped and unfolded it. Now there was a new mark on it, flickering like a beacon. James realized that the forest was leading him. But where?